a haven in the frost. The year was 1890, and the frost had not yet blanketed the rolling plains of Willow Creek. The wind, sharp and restless, carried the bite of an approaching winter, sweeping across the open fields like a spirit searching for a place to rest. Elias Hart, a man of 40 with hands worn by years of labor, had just finished mending the northern fence of his modest homestead when a faint knock broke the silence. It was soft, 3 hesitant taps, spaced as if the hand behind them feared to disturb but was too desperate to remain unheard. Wiping his calloused palms on his woolen coat, he crossed the creaking porch and opened the door. 2 children stood before him, framed by the vast, gray sky that stretched endlessly over the plains. The girl, perhaps 6, had auburn hair tangled by the wind, her cheeks flushed red from the cold, yet her posture was resolute, her small frame unyielding. In her arms, she cradled a tiny gray kitten, its fur barely visible beneath a tattered woolen scarf. Beside her stood a boy, no more than 4, his wide, solemn eyes fixed on the ground, one small hand clutching the hem of his sister's patched coat like it was his only tether to the world. The girl looked up at Elias, her voice barely rising above the wind's low hum. "Can you buy our kitten? Mama's real sick. We ain't got no food left." Elias didn't answer immediately. His hand tightened on the doorframe as he studied their faces, searching for the story hidden in their eyes. The wind tugged at the boy's frayed collar, and the kitten mewed faintly, nestling closer to the girl's chest. Elias stepped back, his voice steady but soft. "Come inside." The girl nodded, guiding her brother over the threshold with a practiced care, as if she'd led him into countless strange places before. Elias closed the door behind them, the warmth of the iron stove casting flickering shadows across the worn pine floorboards. The cabin was simple but tidy. Walls of weathered wood, a low fire crackling in the stone hearth, a single chair shaped by years of solitary evenings. A faint scent of pine and bread lingered in the air, mingling with the warmth. "You hungry?" Elias asked, his tone gentle but direct. The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering with pride. "We're fine. You sure?" He raised an eyebrow, his voice carrying a quiet insistence. "Sit." He poured milk into chipped tin mugs, the liquid steaming slightly in the cool air, and sliced thick pieces of cornbread from a loaf on the counter. The boy said nothing, his gaze fixed on the kitten now resting in his lap, its tiny paws twitching as it settled. The girl met Elias's eyes with a quiet gratitude before taking a cautious sip, her hands trembling slightly. Elias watched them eat, noting how they handled the bread with care, breaking it into small pieces as if it might vanish if they moved too quickly. Their clothes were thin, patched in places, their boots too large for their feet, the soles worn thin from miles of walking. He didn't ask their names yet. Names made things real, permanent, and he wasn't ready for that weight. He crouched by the hearth, the fire warming his knees as he stirred the coals. "Where's your mama?" "By the creek," the girl said, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. "In a wagon. She's got a fever." "You alone out there?" She nodded, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "We came 'cause she couldn't." There was a steadiness in her voice, not fear but determination, the kind that comes when a child has to grow up faster than the world allows. Elias stood, his shadow long against the wall. "I'll come with you. We'll see what we can do." The children followed him without a word, their small figures dwarfed by the open landscape. The sky was darkening, the horizon streaked with violet and ash, the air growing colder as the sun sank. Beyond the sparse pines, near the shallow banks of Willow Creek, stood a weathered wagon, its canvas torn and flapping in the wind. No horse, no fire, just the faint rustle of dry reeds and the hum of the wind through brittle grass. Elias approached slowly, his boots crunching on the frozen ground, the sound sharp in the stillness. The girl climbed into the wagon first, her movements quick and sure, then turned and beckoned him inside with a small, urgent gesture. Inside, a woman lay on a straw pallet, blankets pulled tight around her, though they did little to hide the gauntness of her face or the fever's flush across her brow. Her breathing was shallow, a fragile thread stretched thin, each exhale a faint tremor. Elias knelt beside her, his breath catching when he saw the scar. A faint, crescent-shaped mark below her right eye, pale against her fevered skin. His heart stumbled, the years collapsing in a single moment. "Clara," he whispered, the name catching in his throat like a thorn, sharp and unyielding. He touched the edge of her blanket, fingers trembling as he uncovered more of her face. 12 years. 12 years since she'd vanished without a word, leaving him with nothing but questions and a hollow ache that had settled into his bones. He'd heard whispers over the years. Some said she'd married a wealthy merchant, headed east to a life of comfort. Others claimed she'd died in a mining town, lost to fever or misfortune. He'd never sought the truth, held back by pride and the pain that kept him rooted to this lonely patch of land. Yet here she was, wasting away in a broken wagon with 2 children and a kitten as their only offering. Clara stirred, her brow twitching, lips moving soundlessly as if caught in a dream or a memory. Elias stood and stepped outside, unable to face her until he could make sense of the moment. The wind bit at his face, and he pulled his coat tighter. The girl stood nearby, watching him with those same dark, steady eyes. "She's been real tired," she said. "Sometimes she talks to people who ain't there." Elias crouched before her, his voice low. "What's your name?" "Anna," she said, her chin lifting slightly. She nodded toward the boy. "He's Caleb. How long you been traveling?" "Since summer." "And your mama? She ever mention a place called Willow Creek?" Anna nodded, her eyes softening. "Said it was the only place she ever felt alive." Elias swallowed, the words heavy in his chest, stirring memories he'd buried long ago. "All right," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "We'll bring her back now." The wagon groaned as Elias hitched it to his old mule, the beast snorting softly in the cold. The path to the cabin felt endless, weighted by memories he hadn't touched in years. Anna sat beside him on the wagon's bench, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Caleb stayed inside the wagon, holding the kitten and his mother's hand, the faint mewing of the animal mingling with the creak of the wheels. Clara didn't stir. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky was a tapestry of stars, silver and cold. Elias carried Clara inside, her weight light as a shadow in his arms, her body fragile in a way that made his chest ache. He laid her on his bed, the only one in the cabin, and built up the fire, the flames casting a warm glow across the room. He boiled water and mixed feverfew tea, the old remedies his grandmother had taught him returning like instinct, his hands moving with a quiet certainty. He said nothing. Not her name, not his anger, only silence, heavy and unbroken. That night, the children slept by the hearth, the kitten curled between them, its soft purring a small comfort in the quiet. Elias sat by the bed, watching Clara's chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile bridge between past and present. The years stretched and collapsed with every shallow inhale, and he found himself tracing the lines of her face in the firelight, searching for the woman he'd known. Morning came with a pale, cold light filtering through the frost-laced windows. Clara stirred but didn't wake, her fever breaking in a sheen of sweat that dampened her forehead. Elias wiped it away with a damp cloth, his hands steady despite the storm in his heart. He sat there, watching, waiting, the silence between them filled with questions he wasn't ready to ask. He hitched the wagon again and headed for the town of Stone Hollow, a half-day's ride across the windswept plains. He needed medicine, quinine if they had it, along with bread, blankets, and anything else he could afford. The children watched him go, their eyes wide but trusting, Anna clutching the kitten as Caleb stood close beside her. Stone Hollow was much as it had been. A dusty main street lined with weathered storefronts, a leaning chapel with a crooked steeple, and whispers that passed for currency among the townsfolk. At the general store, Mrs. Tate leaned over the counter, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Well, Elias Hart, out of your cave at last." Heard a wagon rolled in. 2 kids, a woman half dead. "Swear it looked like Clara Wren, but that's impossible. Ain't it?" She ran off with some fancy man years ago, married into money. Elias didn't answer, his silence louder than words. Need quinine, he said, his voice flat. Mrs. Tate slid the bottle across the counter. Her lips pursed. If it is her, watch yourself. This town don't forget a scandal. Folks still talk about how she left you high and dry. Elias took the bottle, his jaw tight. Outside, Sheriff Polk leaned against a post, his eyes narrowing as he tipped his hat. You running a shelter now, Hart? Not a shelter, Elias said, loading his supplies into the wagon. Just fixing what's broken. The sheriff nodded, but his gaze lingered. Heard some talk. If that's Clara Wren, there's folks who'll want answers. Best be ready. Elias drove back through the gathering dusk, the wind colder now, carrying the promise of snow. Back at the cabin, the kitten greeted him with a soft mew, its gray fur catching the firelight. Anna was tending the fire, her small hands steady as she added a log. Caleb was wrapped in a quilt, asleep on the floor, the kitten's warmth a comfort beside him. Elias stepped into the bedroom, and his breath caught. Clara's eyes were open, meeting his with a clarity that cut through the years, her gaze both familiar and foreign. Neither spoke for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken history. Her lips parted, her voice faint but steady. You're older. You're not, he said softly, though the years had etched lines into her face, hollowed her cheeks. 1,000 questions pressed against his ribs, but he held them back, afraid of what they might unearth. They came to sell the kitten, he said, his voice low. Said you were sick. Clara closed her eyes, a tear slipping into her hair, catching the firelight. I didn't want them to. You didn't come looking for me? I didn't think you'd want me found. Elias stood, arms crossed, his heart caught between breaking and mending. I never stopped waiting, he said, the words heavy with truth. Just stopped believing you'd come. Clara turned her face to the wall, her voice brittle as dry leaves. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I know, he said, though he didn't fully, not yet. But in that moment it felt like a truth he needed to hold, a lifeline across the years. The kitten padded into the room, its tiny claws clicking softly on the floorboards, and curled at Clara's feet as if it had always belonged there. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, a quiet was beginning to take root, fragile but stubborn. The frost laced the windows the next morning, delicate as spiderwebs, clinging to the glass like a promise half-made. Clara's breathing was steadier, no longer teetering on the edge of oblivion. She'd slept for nearly 3 days, her body fighting the fever with a tenacity that surprised Elias. In that time, Anna had begun to move through the cabin with a cautious ease, folding blankets with a precision that spoke of habit, her eyes always scanning the corners of the room as if expecting them to shift. Caleb trailed Elias, the kitten tucked under his arm, his small steps a quiet echo as Elias worked, chopping wood, boiling water, tending to the small tasks that kept the cabin alive. It was a healing measured not in words but in moments. Anna lingering closer to the stove's warmth, Caleb letting go of her hand for a heartbeat longer each day, the kitten's soft purring a constant thread in the quiet. On the 4th day, Clara woke at dusk, the firelight tracing her hollowed face, catching the faint scar beneath her eye. Her eyes opened, uncertain, as if she feared the world might be a dream too cruel to trust. Elias stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the fading light. You're still here, she said, her voice faint but clear. I am. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. I thought maybe I'd imagined you. You didn't. Clara sat up slowly, clutching the quilt, her movements careful, as if testing her own strength. She turned her face toward him, her expression caught between fear and hope, like someone expecting judgment but praying for mercy. I should explain, she said, her voice raw, each word pushed from a place deep and sore. But you might not want to hear it. Elias sat beside the bed, his hands clasped like he was holding himself together, his knuckles white. I've waited 12 years, Clara. I can wait a few more minutes. She gave a small, sad smile, the kind that carried more pain than joy. They forced me to leave. My father said if I didn't marry that merchant, he'd ruin you. Forge debts in your name, see you locked away. He hated that you had nothing, no family, no status, and I loved you anyway. He hated that I looked at you like you were the only thing that mattered. He made me leave the next day. I couldn't even write to you. Said he'd destroy you if I tried. I married that man before winter came. Elias stared at the fire, his voice low, rough as gravel. And after he died? 3 years ago. He never touched me, not with his hands, but he didn't need to. He treated us like possessions, moved us from town to town so we'd never belong anywhere. I didn't even have my own name on paper. When he died, I felt the world stop trembling. I came back because Willow Creek was the only place that ever felt like home. Elias nodded, his eyes still on the fire. You could have come to me. I didn't think I deserved to. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady. They came with a kitten, Clara. Said you were dying. I didn't send them. I know. The wind moaned outside, low and long, and the kitten mewed softly, soothed by Anna's gentle shushing from the next room. Clara's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I still love you, Elias. The words hung between them, heavy and fragile, like a plate left at a stranger's table. He didn't respond, not yet. Instead, he rose slowly and walked to the kitchen, his boots soft on the floorboards. Clara watched him disappear around the corner, the sound of his steps fading. When he returned, he carried a bowl of soup, still warm, the scent of herbs filling the room. He placed it in her hands without speaking, then sat again. You'll stay until you're strong, he said. Clara looked at the bowl, her fingers trembling as they closed around it. I don't want to bring trouble to you. You won't. I might. I've been alone too long to care what anyone thinks. The next morning came painted in pale gold, the sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Clara had enough strength to sit at the table, her movements slow but deliberate. Anna brought her a mug of tea, the steam curling in the cool air, and Caleb climbed into her lap, the kitten nestled beside him. For the first time, Clara smiled with a flicker of hope, a promise that she might smile again tomorrow. The days settled into a quiet rhythm, each one a small step toward recovery. Anna shelled peas, her hands quick and precise, while Elias split wood, the steady thwack of his axe echoing across the yard. The weight of the past lingered like embers under ash, hot but hidden. Stone Hollow's whispers hadn't reached them yet, but Elias knew they would. A town like that never forgot, and its memory was long and unforgiving. On the 7th day, Sheriff Polk rode up, his horse's hooves kicking up dust in the morning light. His face was grim, his hat tilted low. Trouble, Hart, he said, dismounting. Got a telegram from the city. Some merchant's estate is looking for Clara Wren. Says she took off with 2 kids. They're talking custody, legal claims. Elias didn't blink, his face a mask of calm. She didn't run. She came home. Don't matter to them. She's safe here, but the law cares about papers, not people. You'll need to make this legal or give them a reason to back off. They're giving me a week before they send someone meaner. Elias nodded, his jaw tight. I'll handle it. The sheriff tipped his hat, his eyes lingering. Hope you know what you're doing. That night, Elias stood under the stars, the old ache in his chest stirring like a wound reopened. Clara stepped onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her breath clouding in the cold air between them. What is it? She asked, her voice soft but steady. They want to take your kids. Her breath caught, her eyes widening with a fear that cut through the calm. He turned to her, his voice low but firm. They can't if they're mine too. Clara stared, her voice trembling as she spoke. You'd marry me? After everything. I waited 12 years, Clara. She stepped closer, her hand hovering near his, not touching but close enough to feel his warmth. What if it's too late? It's only too late if we let it be. From the window, Anna watched, her small figure framed by the firelight. Caleb slept on the floor, the kitten curled beside him, its soft purring a quiet counterpoint to the wind. Elias spoke again, his voice softer now, almost lost in the night. Tomorrow we go to town. I got no fancy promises, no rings or flowers. But I got a name, and it's yours if it means you can breathe again. Clara's eyes shone, but no tears fell. I'll take it, she whispered. Not because I'm broken, but because I want to stand with you. Elias looked up at the stars, closer now than they'd ever been. Behind them, the pines whispered in the wind, and a quiet hope took root in the frost, fragile but growing stronger with each passing moment. The cabin stood warm against the cold, a haven carved from pain and patience, and for the first time in years, Elias felt the weight of the past begin to lift, replaced by the faint but steady promise of a future.
Thank you for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you love this video, and share your loved on.